Hello, everyone. It's Francis, Martin, and Curt for the Natural Law Institute. This is our, I guess it's bi-weekly uh, office hours Q&A session where you submit your questions. They go into a queue, and we hopefully eventually get to them. We tend to have quite a full queue most of the time. We had to do more frequent more
We
frequent.
did a month of encore back in December, where it's once
Yeah,
every week. That's how
because it
we
was
celebrate the holidays
the
with our
holidays by
viewers.
more. So anyway, and the links to those where to submit your questions in the bottom is in the comments of this video. The At this point we must be closing in 400.
Yeah, we're closing on 400. So with luck, if we don't spend like an hour debating the first question, we'll be able to get through our December backlog now, today.
Wow.
And after that, we've got stuff submitted until the end of February. So we're running behind about 2 months.
All right. So in how it works is Francis usually reads the question. Martin has prepared an answer, and I add depth and color to whatever Martin has said. This seems to be the way it works best. Anyway, so let's get started.
Yes, let's do that. Question one. I saw Curt put Dune and Starship Troopers in the mythology section of the reading list. What significance do these works, along with comic books, have on the mythology of American civilization?
Well, the comic book industry is largely Jewish, so I'm not sure if anything would make it into any European myth. Granted, comics have that effect now, but we see what kind of people it produces. Anyway, I'll let Curt explain his reasons for why those two works are there, but my understanding is the tropes these works introduced were genre-defining. In the same way Tolkien defined fantasy, Dune gave us space operas like Star Wars, while Starship Troopers have descendants in Aliens, Warhammer 40k, and StarCraft. Another American name that belongs on that list is H.P. Lovecraft.
Mhm. Very good, Martin. So the heroic, basically it's the heroic narrative of Western Civ, and the heroic narrative goes through a series of changes throughout history. You have, of course, the Germanic, that you have the ancient ones, which is the what is it called? The No, I'm thinking of the Greek, the matter of Greece and Rome. You have the matter of France, the matter of Germany, the matter of England. And when they say matter, it means the heroic literature of those civilizations. The the heroic literature across time, right? Right, in the year, basically, I'm basically listing the American here, um, and that's just the continuation of the European or West Indo-European heroic tradition. It's a means of obtaining status through heroic acts, mostly. All right. There's also horror, which horror tends to be the way we use moral lessons, and science fiction is the way we bring in new technology or experimental conditions. In other words, they're ways of artificially creating conditions under which heroism and morality can be explored. So, I usually start um, I mean, I've done quite a bit on this, and that's why I had to look it up. I have to recall what I wrote on it. I remember starting with Ivanhoe as one of the examples, which is really another. It's sort of like this knightly stuff. So you certainly have your King Arthur, the Arthurian legend, in the 1200s, I think it is. You have the origins of it before that. In the Germany, you have the Nibelung, right, which is the ring, the story of the ring, which gives us eventually the Hobbit. In France, you have the study of, why are my words not wanting to come this morning? The Carolingian stories, and in this in the matter of Greece and Rome, you largely have the heroism of the Greek epic cycle. So this literature is basically trying to give us not only inspiration, but also reward and psychological self-reward for heroic contribution to the commons. So it's all heroism. Um, uh, so it's not really difficult to look at these and the Starship Troopers, or to look at Ivanhoe, or to look at Martin. You brought up what's his name?
Lovecraft.
Sorry,
I brought up Lovecraft.
Lovecraft. Thank you. You brought up Lovecraft.
Is that heroic? So
yes, or Tolkien, or what's the guy that Lovecraft is born of? The guy did.
Poe, maybe.
Oh yeah. You're always looking. It's basically more fantasy moral literature. I would actually argue most philosophy is fantasy moral literature in the rhetorical sense, rather than fantasy moral literature in the narrative sense. Um, and so what's your actual question? What significance to these works? Well, anything that's contributing to the group evolutionary strategy, and the Western group evolutionary strategy requires heroism because it requires high trust. And so you're looking for produce heroic acts on the benefit of civilization, of the general population. It's essentially the origin of all Western tradition, which is in the initiatic brotherhood of soldiers or warriors, which is of course shit that happened on the steppe, right? I mean, that's so. I mean, what we're doing is fucking 5,000 years old. Excuse me, I didn't mean to curse there. I try not to do that so much. Brad's got me almost out of it, but but I grew up in New England. It's not easy to leave the F word behind as a necessary component of human speech. You know, Brandon doesn't do it very often anyway. So so these are really continuations of the mythology, and they are significant because they work. As a matter of fact, they work by um, uh, means of suggestion rather than instruction. And that's because when you read, you suspend disbelief, you internalize the experience, and so you're being taught. To intuitively react to things within your civilization strategy. I should have mentioned Tolkien in there, but the one that is most obvious is Starship Troopers, because it is merely or maybe Forever War is pretty good too. But Starship Troopers is not a long book, a complicated one, and it's basically the simple lesson that if you you need to earn your say in the polity is really what
Yeah.
it is about.
How does it go? No citizenship without service or something?
Yes, exactly. And this
Guaranteed citizenship.
correct. And I would argue that this is going to come up in one of the later questions today that Martin also got. Is that when the mistake we have made with democracy is that we have said it's the universal franchise rather than it's the heroic responsible franchise, right? If you haven't earned the right to say it by demonstrated behavior, essentially paying the risk cost, or the merit cost, then you shouldn't have say in it. And if you have paid it, then you should have say in it.
I wouldn't say it's a mistake. I'd say once you have a two-party system, it's inevitable that one would benefit from expanding the franchise if you allow them.
That's smart. Can you say that again?
Once you have a two-party system, it's inevitable that one party will benefit from expanding the franchise.
Right. There have been two arguments to that position, right? To support your position. One is that you don't allow parties. I don't know if that's possible, right? I don't know if that's possible. The
Don't
second,
allow parties. So, i.e., well, but what rules are you gonna use to?
You can still have representatives, but you vote for a single person without any official affiliation.
it's okay, so you jumped ahead. You're not playing Brandon today, are you? So the first step is that they don't you don't allow parties, but that doesn't work, right? The party is a name or a way of thinking. What generally happens if you do allow parties, it's better to have a system that does not use first past the post, which produces the strong party and the weak party, and produces exactly what Martin has said, which is you have somebody who's a party that's trying to govern, and then a party that is by essentially elitism, and then a party that is trying to undermine that by expansion of it. You always get that, right? Great. Then you say, how do I control those two things? Well, you could have multi-party system, which then distributes the power and forces a compromise, right? Or you could have what Martin suggested is you can vote for the monarchy once in a while, all right, or whatever, or an individual, and that person can pick a cabinet, and then you don't need to have those things. That works at a certain scale. The problem is you end up needing a Senate simply to collect regional differences, because otherwise what happens is the capital becomes the power center at the expense of the rest. What permutations am I forgetting to go over? So the other is that you can attempt to do what we have in the English and American systems, which should have not been first past the post, which is to divide the labor, right? Create a marketplace, right, for the different classes to organize. This becomes important at scale. It's not important at small scale. That's a mistake. And then all it does is take a small country and make it more prone to political opportunism and special interests.
But I would argue that maybe the founding fathers actually planned ahead, i.e., they know the system is overbuilt for a small country with just the 13 colonies. They built it for the eventual conquering of the continent, which
Right.
at that time, do they even know how big the continent is? Where's the western borders lie?
By the 1700s, they know how big the continent is. It's just fucking big, right?
Yeah.
By late 1700s. They just don't have a map of it, right? I mean, you got to get to Lewis and Clark for that. So the way they looked at it is that they already had the examples of going on in Germany, which is we don't get taught that, but they were very aware of the German princedoms and how that worked, right? Because it's a West Germanic. England is a West Germanic country. I mean, it's right. And so, and they were aware of what happened in the UK, and the UK gave them the template for having princedoms, right? And then, and which then turned into basically the Welsh, the Scottish, the English, the Northern Irish, etc. And then in America, they had the 13 colonies. But one thing I try to emphasize, I can't remember who was talking about this, was that you had four four groups of fundamentalists that settled the East Coast in America, and they don't really have compatible theological foundations. They have only compatible political and economic foundations. And some would argue that their foundations were only defense, that they were only related to defense. But that grew, right? So I would say that the problem, so that they built America for imperial purposes. In other words, an empire over the continent, or at least they're part of the continent. So they didn't start out. That makes them almost closer to the princedoms, the German princedoms, of which there were 300 and something at the time, where versus the smaller utility of the British, but they had enough experience of the British to know what the British Empire was turning into, right? So they had a lot to work with. Plus, they had the recent knowledge of economics. They had the recent understanding of natural law. They had the recent understanding of the Enlightenment and the sciences. So they had a lot of advantages that weren't there in the past. They planned pretty well, but my argument is still the same as theirs was. You can't give the vote to people who don't carry the weight. And that seems to have been our primary problem. If you only do that, then you don't have the problem Martin has brought up, which is that one party takes undermining, right? In other words, parties can have, or interests can have conflicting interests. That's fine, because there's only so many resources to spread around. There's only so many directions you can go, right? There's only so many trade-offs you can make. But the minute you say we're gonna interfere with that market of interests and produce the people who want to undermine it, then you get the problem. And we got the problem with first with at the time of the Industrial Revolution and the Marxist introgression. Secondly, we had women, and third, we had the 60s introgression of cultural hostiles. So it's been consistently undermining the one thing that prevents the Republican government from working.
So rewind a little bit. I'm looking at the 14th Amendment. How much do you think the 14th Amendment was a way? I mean, the 14th Amendment obviously expanded the voting franchise, right? So how much of it was to, how should I put it, reintegrate and pacify a fighting age population back into society? Because they, as the saying goes, the only thing more, I'm probably butchering it and paraphrasing, the only thing more dangerous than a soldier of war is a soldier coming home.
Correct.
And so back then it was actually Republicans that expanded the franchise, i.e., like you said, in the two-party system, the one that expands the franchise at the expense of the other. But then in this case, how do you think that the ruling elites at the time should have resolved this political crisis, essentially the first cycle after founding?
Well, give them a different reward, or don't make the vote hereditary, and don't give it to blacks.
Well, they shouldn't have given it to blacks, because that was the thing that the Northeast women were advocating for giving it to the blacks.
Yeah, but women couldn't vote at the time.
No, but they were making a lot of noise. That's
okay. So they nagged other men into it.
Right.
And since when does giving women what they want silence them?
Say that again, Martin. I can't hear you over there.
Since when does giving women what they want silence them?
Yeah. Well, okay. A painful lesson learned. The problem we have, Martin, is that the beginning with the Industrial Revolution, certainly through the progressive period, there was an optimism that we had broken free of prior constraints. In other words, it allowed for utopian thinking because of the increased prosperity, increased communication. Everything was rapidly changing. And so you had a lot of foolish optimism all over the place. And the empirical side, which is the more conservative, lost to the utopian side.
Yeah,
But
those delusions were there from the beginning. I've read William Penn.
give me that again.
I've read William Penn, the Quaker.
And yeah, but I don't know which argument you're saying you're making, that the utopianism is there.
Utopian delusions were there from the
Oh,
start.
yeah, well, that's part of the fucking Christian thing, right? That's absolutely true. It's part of it's the whole. It's basically when you have a frontier mentality, right? You're going to get some of that. And so with the age of sail, the frontier mentality gives in, which is opportunity. Then the second one that gives in is the Enlightenment, right, which comes with, right, and the third one that comes in is the Industrial Revolution. And so we've had a series of um, and I would argue you're right. So it's Western. It's a, you could call it's a Western utopian bit of nonsense, but it's always couched under both the Christian and the Aryan domains, right? You get it as Christian expression. What does it say? Christianity was a vehicle for justifying Aryan expansion. All right. You get that universalism, and you get it as both pragmatic opportunism, uh, uh, and you get it as white man's burden in the Christian sense, and you get it as the traditional heroic conquest on the third. And so there's all these fucking incentives going on to make this stupid utopianism fucking possible. On the other hand, that utopianism or that opportunism is how expansion occurs. In other words, how innovation expansion occurs. The problem is, how do you know when you're organizing people with inspiration versus when you're organizing people into suicide? I mean, and the problem is, once it becomes immaterial, in other words, I'm doing this thing at high cost to make it happen, or we are doing these things, too political, which is we can organize the polity to do that. That's where it becomes a problem, right? That it's actually politicizing the utopianism rather than entrepreneurializing the utopianism, if that makes sense. Am I making sense? I get Francis. I'm trying to see if I'm making my point here or
You kind
not.
of lost me there. Sorry,
Yeah.
pause.
All right, I'll write something up about that. Basically, if it's not bad to have heroic literature, it's not bad to have utopian inspiration. I wouldn't call it philosophy. Maybe philosophy is right, but you can't bring that into government. Government has to be empirical. And what they did is they brought it into government, and they brought it into government by expanding the franchise to people who didn't have either knowledge or responsibility to do so. You can see this really easily amplified in America in the post-war period by the conversion, especially after the 1950s, by the increasing credentialism. Instead of having people that run the country from the military and the industrial sectors, right, the financial industrial sectors, They started having people from the academy start taking places. That was a criticism of what's his name, the president there, Wilson. He's like, he's a fucking academic. He's going to say stupid shit. Well, he did do stupid shit because he was impractical.
And he got
Um,
us involved in a stupid war.
right. I mean, so the problem is essentially Luke's obsession at scale. Luke Weinhagen, our uh, partner in this organization. Luke's organism is if people don't have direct experience with the competing with the universe, right? I mean, and organizing people to compete with the universe. They don't have that experience, um, then they are essentially a priesthood,
Hmm.
and they live by imaginary rules or fantasy rules or literary rules.
Well, it's my argument that the only priest we should have are warrior priests.
I love that
It's
idea.
just Aryan tradition.
Yes, I love that idea. Um, so so that's the fundamental problem that happens is we call it, is it the Peter principle? What is it where you
Yeah, it's Peter Principle. You got promoted to a position of your incompetence.
right?
And
Well,
the Stillbirth principle that you get promoted up from position where people actually work where you could do harm.
yes. So I would say that's the underlying a problem is, and that's why I say, I look back at it and because I'm learning, I'm really getting this down from writing volume one, right? The cycles. And it's, I look at it forgivingly because that's my fucking position in life, right? I don't, I can be mad at the Marxists, right? Mostly because they're lying, right? But when people aren't necessarily lying, they're actually following incentives that are rational and productive. I tend to be forgiving of them when they're wrong. But, once we've learned something, in other words, it's hard to criticize people for not knowing what they does isn't known, and then look at history and say, well, they just didn't know any better. They were actually trying to do the best they could. I tend to look at that as uh, as as just normal human behavior. But once you know it, you should guard against it. My problem so far is I think we're learning about how that unless you're from an equally neotenous background, you really have no place in among Europeans. Um, we can't see the only a minority of people seem to be able to do it. Yet, if you say, okay, um, uh, that's one thing. Then the other thing, excuse me, the first step is if you're not able to demonstrate responsibility, you shouldn't have a say. If you aren't from the culture, right, then you need to integrate. If you can
Uh,
integrate, that's fine. To the point on when Martin, I know you're going to object, and I'm just being more optimistic than you are, and you're more risk than I am.
well, once you see that it doesn't work, you should correct that optimism.
Okay, that's what
That's
I'm
what,
agreeing with you.
that's what growing
But
up is.
the problem is women. I don't think we can fix women. I don't think we want to fix women.
Well, there's nothing to fix. You want them
Yeah,
to
there's
turn
nothing
them
to
into
fix. Otherwise,
something they're
I was going to say exactly. Otherwise, you turn them into inferior men.
Right? So I
That's
don't
what
I don't
Aristotle
think that.
told them.
So I would just say the real evidence is you want people with real experience in the real world doing real things as the people who govern, and I think that's the fundamental problem. And that's going to be uh, almost entirely male, right? And it's going to be almost entirely made up of people that have succeeded in either the military, industrial, or commercial arenas. because those are the only places you have to work to organize people and capital to produce a beneficial end. I'm not quite sure, anyway, so that's where I am with it. I don't know how we got that far in that one question. How does that always happen? We just spent fucking more than half an hour
I
on
think
that thing.
yes. Well, this always happens. I mean, I think of it as a warm up exercise to get our brains going anyway. So I
Is that
stopped
what it is?
complaining about the hour long answers.
Absolutely nothing to do with that question.
Well, I mean, I see the causal chain, right? We talk about hero literature. Well, these are modern hero literatures, and we went into like citizenship and went to talk about the 14th Amendment and so on.
It's a causal chain of getting distracted.
Okay,
Yeah, that's great.
that's a
The
great
only thing
theological book.
I would like to close with is, I've been Martin and I have been back and forth on this, but it's taken me a while to understand it. Is I have an Anglo risk tolerance, and Martin has a continental risk tolerance, and that's really the difference between it. And you'll see this.
I have nothing against risk taking, but don't drag normal people into it.
Great idea, great way of framing it. Yes, absolutely, I agree. All right,
Okay.
next one.
Question 2. How does one maximize cognitive function and demonstrate intelligence between the ages 14 and 25? That feels like
I
deja vu.
think this is the same person that was asking this about children last time, and my answer is the same. And obviously do the more age-appropriate things, given what you've already learned, but otherwise same principles.
The only thing I would say, and I'm sort of having a chat with what's his name, Prescott. What's his first name? Jonathan
Jonathan,
Prescott.
Homeschool Life
Who's
LLC.
the homeschooling thought leader in America,
Yep.
I guess, is that it's pretty clear that after about 8th grade, we're not doing the majority of people any good. It would be better to get them at least half in the workforce at that point, or let them go into the workforce and a trade school that early, or the workforce, trade school, and early military training, right? And then those of us, I mean, well, we'd probably all be in this camp. In America, in New York, we had a Regents. I don't know if it's still there, but we had the Regents program, which was for people who were going to go on to college. Right? I would have liked that. I just think they taught us a lot of the wrong stuff. I mean, today I feel, I've done this curriculum game, uh, and I feel like we don't teach people what they need to know to succeed in the college destined category. But my view is that and I think this is common feeling among kids who are in 8th grade and high, after 8th grade, and 9th through 12th. I think the common feeling is that this is not useful to me, and I think that's fixable.
I said last time, I think onus on training should be a lot more on the employer instead of this.
Yeah, that's what I meant by Nick. Get them into the workforce. I agree with you. I actually think it's much more dependent on that. As for college education, there's no, if I don't know what, I suppose I can look it up right here. What percent of the population has an IQ over 115? It's not a large number. It's like 10% of the population or something.
Probably.
Yeah. Uh, that it just doesn't mean most of those people don't need to go to college. It's a waste of time and money. It impedes reproduction. It does not teach them anything. It indoctrinates them, and women in particular. It introduces them into things that are bad.
So assuming a mean IQ of 100, which I think we're like a little bit below that now, we're looking at about less than 15. Oh, well, yeah, let's see. About 10%.
They're not being irrational. It does grant them access to certain positions and certain status. It's a problem that these incentives exist at all.
Can you elaborate on Martin? Because I don't think that what you mean is exposed in that, in what you're saying that.
Well, insofar, certain credentials or even going through specific institutions is expected to get into certain high status positions, and those people are being rational to trying to do that, even if they're learning nonsense. But the credential is useful to them.
But we know, we can look at the data. I mean, two things are happening. One is that people are getting debt for a lot of debt and a lot of ideology in fields that can be learned in two semesters in a trade school, right? I mean, that's number one.
I'm not saying that these negative consequences don't exist. It's just that they have real incentives to do that anyway.
Right. I understand that. But we don't. But trying to figure if I anyway. Which way do I go with this? I just want to go down the argument. All right. So we've been encouraging people to go to college. What we have done is we've degraded the quality of high school to do it, and we've degraded the quality of college to do it. And we've put people in the marketplace at large debt, right? In other words, they've accumulated $100,000 of debt, where what the cost of that is they're delaying home ownership, or extending childhood, delaying home ownership, delaying reproduction, and delaying lifetime earnings. And so, if you go where there, and that is detrimental in that sense. Whereas it looks like, I mean, I'm trying to answer the question that's here, that if you want to maximize demonstrated intelligence, you should give it a vehicle for demonstration, not a vehicle for indoctrination. Is really what I guess I'm getting at, and that indoctrination is just a very high cost, and it does it with very low returns. And we're going to see this, right? You know who's going to get kicked out of the fucking economy over the next 10 years, and you know what's going to happen to entry level people over the next 10 years. All right, so it's going to maybe achieve this anyway, but the reality is that if we allowed for IQ, personality and IQ tests, companies would actually hire based on those instead of requiring a college degree. That's really what would happen. So by prohibiting IQ tests, by mandating racial quotas, etc., like that, we're essentially dumbing down everything, and we're making it so we're dumbing down everything, and we're putting extraordinary costs into the population in terms of rates of household formation. Anyway, blah blah blah. I think Martin, you're saying they have the incentive to do that. Yeah, I mean, but we do, and the argument would be, well, you can't stop them from doing it. And I'm like, yeah, we can. We cannot give loans. We cannot guarantee loans for them, and we can hold them.
All I'm saying is that in the present system, they have valid reasons to go to college, but those incentives are a problem.
Yes.
But we can just keep telling in the system as it is people not to go to college when they clearly have reasons to do so.
All right, the next one is freaking awesome, and it's oh my God, Martin, you're gonna fucking die on this
Yes.
one. I don't think I disagree with any of it. So let's go ahead.
Let's do that. Question 3 from Martin. This is different, Martin. Why does the Institute consider libertarianism Abrahamic? I have recently watched many of the NLI conference speeches on YouTube. On multiple occasions, libertarianism was categorized as Abrahamic and parasitic, which I don't seem to be able to compute. I consider myself an anarcho-capitalist. My friends and family consider me the most helpful and trustworthy person they know. I severely condemn parasitism and would like to be a source of plenty myself, instead of flourishing at the expense of someone else. I have nothing against contributing to the commons, but I refrain doing so in certain cases by not paying taxes, etc., because I either don't value the commons the government produces, or see them as parasitism disguised as production of commons. So, with this as a backdrop, it is disorienting to hear that I, a libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, Darwinist, and Nietzschean, am still somehow the very thing I condemn, a parasite. If you have an explanation that would resolve this dissonance in my understanding of propertarianism, I would appreciate it greatly.
The simplest definition of Abrahamism we use is a bait with a false promise of freedom from laws of nature, and that is what libertarianism is. Promises iterated voluntary exchange as an infinite sum game despite scarcity of energy that life necessarily competes over. It doesn't recognize violence is often the most rational strategy for acquisition, it just moralizes about it. It doesn't recognize that violence scales up by coordination, that coordination at scale requires use of coercion, and that groups that can coordinate at scale will conquer those that cannot. As such, they seek to deny their own people self-determination. It seeks to deprive people of the commons they rely on by directly privatizing or by, again, banning coercion that is necessary for making commons viable in the first place and for solving every other prisoner's dilemma, where independently acting individuals are otherwise incentivized to defect, for instance, by refusing punishment of any behavior that lowers trust outside of violence. That is parasitic. It seeks to deny people stability and security which they value so much, while profiting from decisions people make with expectations of stability. It promises equal capacity to be responsible at least for themselves, contrary to evidence, and denies people the paternalism they need. It gives them a cheap right to exist, to exit, while ignoring that exit being expensive is a major factor for people investing into each other, and for the insurance and sense of meaning derived from mutual obligations. It enables profiting from baiting people into vices and addictions. It ignores opportunity costs externalized onto other individuals or the group at large. It ignores that at scale, markets reward quantity at the cost of quality, even when this is more costly in the long run. In general, it ignores the past and future and wishes of those dead and needs of those not yet born. It obsesses about calculation of prices, assumes that prices formed without government interference produce best results without evidence, while ignoring the importance of calculating reputation that can correct for aforementioned malincentives of a pure profit motive, and refuse to maintain conditions of stable communities where reputation can get calculated. It ignores the inevitability of parity distribution of wealth and with it parity distribution of power. It ignores that individuals in a terrible negotiating position, particularly in a position of dependence, may be free on paper but slaves in fact. At the same time, it condemns any sort of collective negotiating that improves the negotiating position. It completely misunderstands the relationship between property and freedom that was historically valued, where freedom meant self-determination and property meant capital enabling individual, family, or community in its own production and subsistence by reducing dependence on external parties. At a higher level enables participation in political activity and leisure by freedom from labor, not means of comfort, luxury, and hedonistic consumption. It takes human action as an axiom, and by not inquiring why humans act one way rather than another, it fails to be a science and enables manipulation of both incentives and convictions for profit. It takes a satisfaction of a want as an automatic good regardless of regret or any evolutionary mismatch, such as abundance of that which we've evolved to desire in conditions of scarcity, such as sugar, or a surrogate activity which only satisfies some animal impulse without producing the outcome the impulse evolved to produce, such as porn and video games. It treats consumption as the purpose of human existence rather than a means to higher ends. Much of this justifies profiting from many kinds of commons without contributing to their maintenance or outright from their consumption. So yes, this is parasitism. Of course, this is applicable to all the modern economic theories. I just argue that the libertarian delusion is what happens when one takes them to their conclusions. Or in other words, our regimes are already libertarian in all the worst ways that are convenient to their rule. This is inevitable because emphasis on individual liberty only empowers a central power needed to provide it. The true decentralization means presence of lesser power centers everywhere, all the way down to the power of the father in his family. Most of us have problems with what the modern governments are doing, and if you oppose those governments in particular rather than government in principle, all power to you. But the solution is not an absence of government, which is unsurvivable or in any case not sustainable or even desirable to almost anyone. It's our people in power first, and mechanisms against letting the situation emerge again second.
Wow, Martin, that was fucking amazing.
Thank
I
you.
want to, utterly amazing, thorough. I would draw the person who's asking the question's attention to uh, much of this justifies profiting from commons, many kinds of commons, without contributing to their maintenance or outright consumption. I would argue that the fellow who's asking this question is not trying to impose costs on the normative commons. But he's not, what he's saying is he's refusing to pay the cost of correcting that which he's objecting to. All right. And essentially justifying the free riding that he's doing on those commons without compensating for them, either by contributing to them or by purging them purging them of parasitism. So it doesn't matter whether it doesn't matter whether we look at it in the positiva or the negativa. You're not paying for the luxury that your freedoms provide. The second part is that well, I mean, I guess I covered that with it. Second part is that you do need to have a government, and you do need to have a government that produces commons, because that's what most of us have problem with modern governance. Yeah, modern governance got out of hand because all governments get out of hand. The trick is not letting them get out of hand or correcting them. We're in a process of correction right now. Libertarianism is a reaction to the need for correction. The problem is the part that Martin didn't cover here, or he at least only suggested in the very beginning, is that there are two forms of libertarianism. There is what we call classical liberalism, which is the kind of libertarian I consider myself being, which is optimistic, perhaps foolishly optimistic, but is at least one way of putting choice first without saying you can free ride on the commons, and Rothbardian or Jewish libertarian. My problem as someone who was deeply involved in that movement, uh, for reasons that that are technical. In other words, I saw solutions to very serious problems, mostly in the work of Hoppe. His reduction of everything to property. It's a computational and philosophical issue. It doesn't matter. But what I was in that movement, and what I found offensive was Rothbard's book on ethics, which lays out the fact that it's Jewish separatist ethics of the settlement of the Pale, which is the freedom to the is that libertarianism makes legitimizes all sorts of baiting into hazard, fraud, not paying for the commons, free riding on the commons, undermining the commons and converting the commons from public to private assets. So I just view the Rothbardian ethic is when, as I do many other things, when you're looking through the lens of the Western tradition, especially the classical liberal tradition, you think you're seeing classical liberalism, which is rule of law, right? What you are not seeing above the natural law, what you are really looking at is an incentive to undermine the government in favor of anarchy so that you can free ride as the Jewish separatists do on the production of commons by others. That's the real that so I think Martin got the whole thing right. What I would just say is I'm trying to point out that the Rothbardian libertarianism is Jewish libertarianism, which is Jewish separatism, which is the license to prey upon the private and common of a high trust population by various kinds of baiting into hazard while justifying it as voluntary choice.
The way I look at it is, if you have a population or group who specializes in feminine antisocial behavior and predation on the populace, the last thing they want is a masculine response, right?
Yeah.
Because sorry, Martin, at the very least, by their imposition of cost and parasitism, they own themselves a beating, up to, basically. Go ahead.
I'll say what I wrote yesterday in the chat, that it's kind of what libertarianism has always been, even if motivations differed, and not at all what American founders were, because they understood the precedence of common good before individual whims. And also because they understood the necessity of centralized sovereignty.
Agreed. Anyway, Martin, I just want to thank you for that response was fucking brilliant. All right, next one.
All right. Well, question 4. From Martin.
Wait a second. It's almost disappointing. You covered it so thoroughly that I'm like, all I can do is add the separatist argument there and on top of it. It's like, wow, that's a really great. I wrote a whole fucking book on that, and I think Martin just convinced it to converted it into a few paragraphs. Anyway.
One more note. In one paragraph, I kind of moving beyond demonstrated interest to inclusive fitness. Because I'm saying even if you demonstrate interest in sugar or in porn, then you shouldn't get them.
Is that okay? I think that's probably just a failure of my positioning. Like, it's like what we really should do, Martin, is when we do the law, we should say anything that we express in the positiva, we should express in the negativa, right? In this case, I would just assume that inclusive goodness was a demonstrated interest, but you're right. It's not. It needs to be up there in the demonstrated interests. Or dependent interests. Is it demonstrated or is it dependent? I think it's dependent. That's an interesting thing. We could add dependent interests, right? Things that we are, I don't know, do we demonstrate an interest in yes. In other words, can interests compete? Yes. Is it actually an interest? I'm not sure. That's not an interest. Is sugar an interest? No. It's a preference. Okay, that's a real. We've got to record that. We're recording this.
Yeah, of course. This goes
Yeah,
on YouTube
I gotta,
Live.
we gotta work on that one. We gotta put that in the. We gotta put that in with the law. That's actually really insightful. All right.
I want to
Uh,
double click on what you said about separate settlement, i.e., beyond the pale, and so on. So even in that case, they still benefit from the commons in a sense, i.e., they still benefit from some level of government ensured law and order, because otherwise they cannot survive criminal raids, right?
that's why they do best here, is we have a high trust society. So we have more freedom to say. Basically, in the end, it comes down to, well, did you decide to do it? It was your choice to do it. You chose poorly, then you're accountable. But the other civilizations don't do that. They say that they flip it around. They say that if you baited someone into hazard, then you're responsible,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's a right, and so that's why that's both why the Jewish and the Muslim techniques work, is that they they are more tolerant of the feminine means of sedition and undermining, right? And so excuse me, we're more tolerant of it, and so they can come here and do it. The Chinese don't let the Muslims get away with this shit. Certainly, the Japanese don't, right? The Japanese don't even let you get away with African public behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I look at it as is that it's our our constraint on individual sovereignty is too permissive. In other words, we're too permissive when we don't outlaw baiting into hazard. I think if you're going to get to the point, we're going to get to the point where it's obvious that our contribution to rule of law is to correct that failure, is that we are going to outlaw baiting into hazard, right? That's, if you look at the entirety of what we're doing, that's what it is.
Yeah, I think you mistaken what I meant. So when the Jews settle beyond the pale, they're
Yeah,
not really a separate nation with defense and so on onto themselves, right? They
no,
still benefited from the state. They still benefit from
yeah,
common defense from the state. They still benefit from the rule of law from the state. They're only able to exist and parasite off of that commons, but meanwhile they don't want to pay for it. So it
correct.
just comes back to like this libertarian fantasy of how do they put it? Just leave me alone. It doesn't
Yeah,
work because it cannot answer the second question of philosophy. Why don't I kill you and take your stuff?
yeah, exactly.
Being left alone sounds good, but different people mean different things. When I want to be left alone, I want to be left alone from foreigners, from unwanted foreign competition, from intrusive new technologies, none of which libertarians reject. Also, Francis just unwittingly made the best case for anarchy. They can survive it.
How?
What?
How can they survive it?
You said they can survive it, and that's a case for anarchy.
No, I said they cannot.
Exactly.
His pronunciation is throwing you. He's
Sorry.
not saying they can survive it. The T is not being
Oh,
emphasized,
okay.
so he's not survive it. All right, so are we ready to move on? Is that
Yep.
good?
Let's move on to question 4. Again from Martin. What is NLI's position on democracy, and what is the reasoning behind it? I've gathered from your YouTube lectures that many faults in today's society come from democracy, from giving an irresponsible herd and a mentally feminine who lacks the ability to model large-scale systems in their mind, the power to veto and sway politics.
Vote.
Oh, so vote. Ugh, there was apostrophe there. So vote and sway politics. which jeopardizes the long-term fitness of societies. But on the other hand, your lecture describes democracy as the only system that works to create agreement between sovereigns like pirates and ancient steppe horse riders. I think you meant raiders. Have I understood correctly that despite all its shortcomings, you still support statism and democracy, but simply want to restrict certain groups' ability to vote? How would these groups allow such an affair? What would reconcile the possibly quite large majority of responsible people who simply categorically disagree with the majority opinion in a certain matter and refuse to live by it? Is it just the ability to secede? Thanks.
My position on democracy has shifted quite significantly. Yes, there are all the criticism that went from philosophers of antiquity to hop ahead, and these are valid. On the other hand, I haven't failed to notice that what masses of people, at least of European people, excluding underfucked women, desire would overall be a vast improvement to what the ruling oligarchs are actually giving us. It is clear that the problem of democracy as it exists today is that it's a legitimizing mechanism for the true power that only serves to reduce its accountability by giving the masses a false impression that they themselves are to blame for the horrible conditions the oligarchy is bringing about. Furthermore, this gives the oligarchs an incentive to politicize everything, to actually try to propagandize the peasants into their evil ideas and thus driving communities and families apart. The primary reason I oppose democracy then is to stop giving peasants the false impression that they have political power, which they don't, to stop giving them dumb ideas and just let them live their lives. This is not to say I want to explicitly legitimize the oligarchy. I want to get rid of them and replace them with an absolute rule of a hereditary monarch whose interests can be far more aligned with the majority. To the extent there is to be any voting at all, it should be either at a local level where people talk to each other and have shared goals, or it needs to correspond to capacity for organized violence that can actually hold representatives to account, a right and duty to execute them for failure to deliver on promises. As for Curt's lectures, I think it may be an instance of projecting one's preferences onto the past. To my best understanding, steppe raiders, and for that matter probably pirates too, wouldn't have been successful if they were democratic. Every successful organization works because somebody's in charge and has a capacity to consistently coordinate towards long-term goals.
Are you done? Yes.
Yes.
Oh, that was really good. I'll make sure I understand the question. Okay. I think this is a great question. I mean, whoever this guy is, I want to thank you for both your questions. They're great. First thing is, when you say democracy, I don't know what you mean. When we say it, we're not thinking about democracy first. We're thinking of rule of law first, and rule of law by natural law first.
I never confuse the two.
Yeah, exactly.
Otherwise, it's rule by legislation or rule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's whatever. So when we say democracy, we mean within, we have the natural law, which is essentially in the West, that's mostly tradition, but we've distilled it down to it over time. Then it's our tradition being very ancient. Then we have a rule of law, which is that rule of law by natural law or natural law. And then we have rule of law, which means that the shit applies to everybody. There's no exceptions. It applies to everybody equally. And democracy is a means of choice. It's not a means of choice about rule of law or rule of law and natural law. It's a means of what commons do we want to produce, creating a market for commons for what we want to produce, given that there is always greater scarcity than, excuse me, there are always greater demands for common investment than there is for than scarcity tolerates. So when you ask us about democracy, we're actually only talking about who the hell should have a say here. You know, in theory, a cabinet should be able to handle a monarchy, and a cabinet can handle most things in most countries. The problem arose for democracy arises once the um, the the noble houses that are included of any territory are being competed with the market. In other words, where in most of our history or feudal history, productivity takes place in the context of manners, which are essentially polities. I mean, that's just like the idea of politics first starts. It's actually manners instead of states. So if we go to Crete, for example, that's a manner, right? They have a it's just a really successful big one because Crete's a great place to trade from. But you know, that's a manner. If you go to the early Middle East, it's basically manners. So cities only come about afterwards. So when you have a collection of manners, their primary concern is is uh, defense and the capacity to produce a market for trade. That's what their primary concern is. So they ally together. So at that point, a monarchy with a cabinet of advisors is fine. Once you get into you have a middle class, which is a trading system, you need to have more. There's more competition for a greater variety of commons that improve the quality of life of people through basically defense and trade, finance, defense, and trade. And so you end up needing a bigger government. The problem that the monarchies ran into is they did not within their families possess the skills. It's the same thing when corporations evolved. Corporations evolved because families no longer possess the skills within them. So they invented the joint stockholder. They took the joint stockholder company and they let the families become the stockholders and they hired professional managers. So the same thing happens at all scales of human endeavor. If you scale up in the diversity of stuff you do increases, you need to have people of skill to do it. You can't just do it because, well, we inherited it. Right? It's the same thing with governments. So you get this pressure. So democracy and the way it evolved in the West is different from how people assume it exists today. In the West, and Martin's going to argue with me this, but I think it's just a matter of he says I'm projecting rather than I'm trying to I'm trying to show the parallel across time. Um, is that uh, is that when you're a bunch of warriors, right, and you have families or clans and families, and you want to go from your river, I don't know if it's which river we can talk about, but where you winter on the river, and then you take your herds and you go out into the steppe in the rest of the seasons. You need numbers, and so when you put numbers together, how do you ally people who are marginally indifferent in their capacity to make war? Right? You don't. You essentially elect or appoint. You choose. Electing is probably the wrong term, but you choose a leader, and that way there's a means of decision making, right? That everybody can follow, so you maintain the concentration of forces and effort and commons, etc. Well, the same thing happens in pirates, and I want to get to Martin's objection here. So same thing happens in pirates. The way it worked is that you elected somebody as a as the captain, and then you elected somebody as the steward of the assets, and those were two different people. And so you had a treasurer and you had a general or a commander, right? And then those two people had different authorities. The rest of it was decided by the group. Now the leader chooses the direction to go, but people always input into it. Anyway, the difference between the step and the pirate and the polity is the cost of defection. In other words, leaving. In other words, if you're on the step and you're with you have your clan. If your clan decides to join another leader, another chieftain or another general or whatever you want to call it, that's a low cost of defection. If you're in a pirate, if you can go join another pirate ship, right? That's a low cost of defection. Because the cap, right? But if you go into a polity and you're a farmer, now or a farmhand, what's the cost of defection? It's fucking high. And so you have different costs of defection when you belong to these different orders. So people will fight harder inside of an agrarian polity than they will in a step migratory band or in a raiding pirate ship. The cost of defection increases, and so when you get into that state, you're looking to find a vehicle for negotiating. So what happens is we have to increase the number of people to cover the scope of things that have to be addressed and to prevent defection of different types. Defection among pirates probably doesn't matter much. Defection among the step raiders could matter a little. Defection in a polity, well, it doesn't matter if it's small, but if all of a sudden you have an opposition that wants to take over the government and change things around, the cost is high. So a market is a way of producing commons, is a way of reconciling those differences in the most peaceful means possible. So when you say, when you ask the question, where is it? What's our position on democracy? Is I don't value democracy at all. It's not about democracy. It's about the rule of law and the scale of organization necessary to resolve internal conflicts that preserve collective. What's the term you used earlier, Martin? The 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 benefits we all depend upon. Um, Sorry, I can't remember what you said. It was really smart. Uh, you said it's oh fuck. I'll go back and figure it out in the recording. But there's defection is very costly, and so what I view democracy is just another means of producing a market for the production of commons. I'm not, as you know, I am not in favor of democracy in the absence of monarchy. I am not in favor of this oligarchical republicanism. I think you need all three. You need to have a monarchy for its intertemporal judgment and to be above the law in the restitution of the law. You need a cabinet for simply to organize whatever resources you have that produce this monarchy or state. You need a senate to be able to pool the interests of different regions and negotiate it. And maybe once in a while you need a house in order to get down into the full subsidiaries. In other words, the real Martin's contribution over the past year has been his demand that we emphasize one of his contributions, subsidiarity, which is local control. And so I see these as just things you add to increase the size of the management team necessary to resolve the conflicts given the plurality of wants and needs and the scarcity of the resources to do so. So I just view it as that. I don't, it's a purely mechanical computational process that I am sort of looking for. And my primary concern is that the rate of change that we have been under since the Industrial Revolution has exceeded the rate at which we can learn, reduce to legislation or law, or which the courts can reduce through empirical discovery to law. And what I think we are doing is we are trying to finish the science of natural law so that decidability is there regardless of scale. In other words, that we can take care of the scale problem. That's how I see what we're doing. Um, uh, but you got to remember that, all of us in our organization have slightly different interests. I mean, that's the beauty of this. What we've got here is that uh, different different people are more concerned with the individual or the family, or Martin's very concerned about the local culture. Um, I tend to be concerned about eliminating what I can see as the Abrahamification of law and the undermining of our world, our system of cooperation, this institutional system. I just view it largely through lying, false promise and deceit. I need utopianism undermining false promise and deceit. I just view that as fucking evil as hell. Um, so that's how I take a look at it. But the people in our organization all have a subtle evil. I think Francis and I are very similar in many ways, but the organization all has different core motives. Does that make sense? Did I do okay there?
Well, I'm looking at what gave opportunities to that situation to emerge in the first place. I see part of that being universalism. We don't,
Yes.
at local level, need to all have the same exact system of law. We can be ruled by local custom as is appropriate for our conditions.
I think it.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Finish that thought.
Well, that's pretty much it.
No, I
Of course,
mean, I agree with you. The problem I think we get into is that I'm the loudest voice, and I'm working on uh, the the reformation of the American first and the Anglosphere second and Europe only third. And I think that dominance tends to my overstate the underlying reality, which is, look, it's just a science of decidability. You need to produce the rules that your polity needs for persistence, and especially for cultural. In other words, there's one thing about formal institutional persistence, and there's another one about informal institutional persistence, and which is culture. And I think that you need to produce the government that allows you to persist whatever you're valuing. My view is that we should be producing natural law that allows people a menu choice to do that. And I that's all I say. I like the positioning it that we've come to lately, which is I like saying it that the naval in particular has way more freedom of what do you call it? We have freedom of movement. I don't know what it's called.
Freedom navigation.
Well, no, it's just we have more freedom than the Continentals do,
Oh, I
right?
see.
Because we're more isolated, right? And so,
You mean you
so
have
we're
more
going to be
latitude? You have more
that.
latitude to experiment without
Yes,
without suffering dire consequences.
correct.
Yeah, but that's
And
why everything keeps getting worse. You can just move away and let it all go to shit.
possibly. So whereas I think Martin's right, especially right for us. I mean, I sort of wish we had somebody in the middle, like Germany, which is a big and powerful country in Europe, but they're not powerful enough. I mean, Europe
Whose
is fourth
fault
way.
is that?
Well,
Whose fault is that?
Okay, let's not assign fault here, right? Yes, I think you've already beaten this horse to death. It's America's fault.
All right, you have the big four in Europe, right? You have UK, Germany, France, and Italy. They're the four that basically. The only one that's a problem in my view is France, because they're no different from Russia. They're fucking wrong. Period. End of story. Right?
Is it possible because in the post-war, De Gaulle was the only one that meaningfully tried to resist American dominance, and that is why you don't like them?
No, it's because they want to rule Europe. Is they think they need to rule Europe, and I'm arguing that Germany. If there needs to be a core state of Europe, it needs to be Germany, because France does everything fucking wrong. And as far as I can tell, Germany does most things right.
I would love to see you talking to Ian Burlingame about it, because in his opinion, the British Empire, or rather the English, is the problem.
Yes.
That and there. What's that fucking crazy group?
Jews.
No, I mean aside from them, it's the white supremacy group. What are they? Anyway,
Which one? The one in the U.S., the one in like somewhere else?
No, there's one in the U.S. and they're still around, and it bothers me that I can see the faces and I can't bring up the name. But so the problem is that the UK has essentially been leading the international order, and the U.S. has become its military enforcer. In that sense, I'm not sure if the UK is the problem, because I'm not sure they're very often wrong. I think the problem is that both of us did not adapt after the fall of the Soviet Union. So we'll see what happens. UK is basically fucked if they separate from the US one way, and they're fucked if they continue to be separated from Europe and the other way. I don't know how it's going to play out.
I think they're already effed internally. Yeah, if the king, they're already effed internally with their demographics. If the king doesn't hit the refresh, the king doesn't, break the glass and bust out the axe and hit the big red reset button, there's not going to be any English left in 100 years.
That's right.
I've seen among Rupert Lowe's promises were to kick out American military.
Great.
So Curt, were you thinking the Patriot Front, the white supremacy group?
No, it's one of those. It's one that's been around. Like, it's not the John Birch Society, but it's one of those fucking groups. I can't remember the name of it. The guy who started it was a Canadian. He came to America. He was originally a Democrat, a labor-oriented guy, and he flipped over and became pretty conservative. But he's sort of on this. His fringe accusation is that we're still run by the English. I'm like, to some degree, the Five Eyes, the Anglosphere, we all have very common interests. And if the UK wants to, the UK does have an intellectual substrate built around the Cambridge Oxford axis and the aristocracy. They do have a grasp of the world that is better than the American grasp of the world. That's just true. So I don't see this as a problem. I see it as a mutually beneficial bit of nonsense. I think the problem that Martin is drawing on, which is we have vastly outlived the use of America as as a protectorate for Europe, allowing it to rebuild and have essentially become a vehicle for spreading this bullshit into Europe.
I saw the other day a post that America doesn't support European countries getting nukes outside of the NATO framework. So that's not sovereign nation. That's still imperial.
I'm not sure that is. Why would that be bad? Why is that a bad thing?
Because when you have your own nukes, then you have self-determination. If somebody else is telling you how you can use them, then you don't really own them.
That's true. You really can't. I mean, the problem with nukes is you can't use them, but that means they can't be used. They can't be used against you. Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I don't understand. I don't have this non-proliferation thing for people within the same civilization, right? It's I have a problem with the Muslims getting them. That's basically
I have
it.
problem with Jews getting it, but they did.
All right, so I don't know where we are now. Other than
we should move on. I have a hard stop at 9 o'clock.
all right.
All right, so question 5. Please deliberate Brandon's lawsuit and how it would be ruled under natural law principles. And also, how can we follow the current updates? Can you link to the PACER docket?
I need Brandon to answer this. All you got to do to follow Brandon is follow his posts on
Natural law Substack. NLI
Substack.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean you can read every one of them. How would it be ruled under? Well, I mean, he's under natural. He's just saying how to rule everything under natural law principles. He's given the court over 100 suggested rulings based on natural law principles. I can't find fault with any of them. Brandon's very, very good. I don't know why you'd want to see the PACER docket. It's a pain in the ass to find anything. But you'd have to ask Brandon that. You can contact him on Twitter if you want, and or X Twitter if you want, and ask him there. You can contact him on his Substack and ask him there. There's something to deliberate. What?
It's the NLI Substack. He doesn't have his own.
Oh, it's on the NLI. Okay, thank you. So that's all I would tell you. How to be ruled? You would agree. I mean, it's everything he says is natural law, is a ruling under natural law. I think the problem isn't one of a simple natural law argument. The problem he's identifying is there's essentially a conspiracy a conspiracy in favor of certain lenders against the people. That's his argument. He's got a conspiracy of how the banks can make illegal judgments, and the court will go along with it. I think that's number one. Above that, he's basically saying, and he wrote a beautiful piece on this, which I'm sort of co-authoring with him. He started yesterday. I've only just started working on it, which is what's sort of wrong. What's wrong, and it's really that they can use procedure to circumvent actually having to reach settlement. And so there's sort of this. It just means the judges are not competent, really, and the law has gotten out of hand. So you can, when we publish that article, you'll see it. But I don't. There's no way how to rule under. Well, I mean, it would be ruled correct. You'd be right. But that's too abstract for the problem he's identifying. He's saying is the state basically is irresponsible and produces and defaults to lenders when the lenders engage in various specious practices simply, and this is absolutely true. I mean, I had a case that I took many years ago. It was a case where somebody claimed I didn't pay something, and I'm like, uh, I can't remember the exact terms of it, but I was like, the state is simply taking their word for it, right? And this is just false. And it was stupefying to me how incompetent the prosecutor and the judge were. In other words, they've turned a lot of law into a mill where there's no reason, there's no care, consideration, and care being judged, and that's just true everywhere. The problem I have is when I'm criticizing the states is that we have it so much better than almost everybody else, but that doesn't mean it's good enough, right? It's not unjust. So uh, if you look at the cases that he's argued, that he's submitted, he's put 100 some of them up there. They're fucking brilliant, and they're reduced to very simple bullet points. And what he's really saying is, in most of them, stop being lazy fucks and not settling them. Your job is to produce settled law. Your job is to resolve conflicts between the people. It's not to let them struggle their way out of it, right? Or just put up with the shit that's been done. It's to achieve settlement. If you're not achieving settlement, you're not doing your job. It's as simple as that, right? And he just says how this meets what criteria this meets in the law, whether if it meets this criteria, this is the choices the court has, and how the court should resolve it. And he'll say, kick it back to the courts, rule for it, rule against it, and why. And if it, what's funny is if you read a lot of Supreme Court, um, I can't remember what it's called, the edict they put out. I can't remember what it's called. Sorry, my mind is somewhere else. Um, if you read a lot of it, it's very wordy, but Brandon reduces it to, I mean, it's none of these things are that complicated. I think what the court's trying to do is try to educate when they inform and educate when they issue rulings. Um, but I think Brandon is trying to inform and educate, excuse me, on first principles on what the court actually decided. And I think it's very clear and very obvious. So we'll see. My belief is that the courts are so reluctant to change, um, that they will do nothing, and that we will have to escalate further. We'll see. All right. Did we run out of time yet, or we got one?
Well, do you think we can answer question 6 in 8 minutes?
This is a great question. Martin answered this. Martin answered this. Answers this.
Okay,
Well,
let's squeeze in one more then. So question 6 from Jonathan: Why is natural law sometimes represented with mysticism in Sanātana Dharma Hinduism, but in the West as actual natural law? Does Curt have any knowledge on this?
Of course, many philosophical and theological traditions arrive at similar concepts because we live in the same reality that they're all trying to describe, among other things they're doing. However, you have to look at the differences. Those are very important. Even natural law has not been used consistently, and a lot of people who refer to it as a good thing really just mean natural law is when things are the way I like them. The way Curt uses the term isn't consistent with its historical usage, largely associated with scholasticism. I've myself lately decided to just stop using the term and instead just say directly what I mean to avoid the confusion.
I have reasons for using natural law. My view is that I'm speaking in the original Aristotelian meaning, that scholasticism, despite its adherence to its expression in theological terms, is just a further refinement of it. Just as I say that Blackstone is the further refinement of it, and that we're doing what I would consider the final refinement of it, returning it to its Aristotelian origins, free of the superstition and theological baggage. Um, but that doesn't mean that people didn't contribute to it over time. Martin's right is that people don't know what the fuck it means, and partly they don't know what it means because there's both a theological and an Aristotelian and classical liberal definition of it.
I mean,
So,
even libertarians claim it.
what?
Even libertarians claim it.
Right, right. So I can do one of two things. I could uh, either choose something somewhat different and then use a neologism, or I could try to recapture the term in its original Aristotelian meaning. And so I chose the latter. Um, uh, I chose the latter, and I did that because of how I anticipate our work being used by the legal profession. So I view it as more consistent with the natural law tradition and completing the arc of it. I would say our work is in general completion of Aristotelian tradition. Um, and that's all and I'm willing to fight that battle of of word capture. I mean, the left does. They take a term and they fucking make it mean the opposite of what it means. And I'm just saying, if they can do that, I'm going to take a term and make it mean what it originally meant. There's still people who think natural law means divine providence, and I'm like, I don't know where I mean, I know where you got that from, but that's just another way the church tried to steal some philosophy as their own. Uh, uh,
After
Aristotle's original ambition is purely empirical. My ambition is purely empirical. This is why natural law exists, and the thing we've done is we've said it's just a continuation of the rest of the physics of the universe expressed at human scale, right? So it's just fucking physics. Excuse me, I said it again, cursing again. So I think we're restoring the era. We're on top of the enlightenment condition of innovation. We're additionally restoring classical the classical meaning of the term. That's what I view us as doing. And Martin's right. It depends on who you're talking to. Um, but for my purposes, I use the natural law. Martin proposed.
You can fight for word definitions after you capture media and academia, and you haven't done so yet.
I understand. Yet. All right. We're at 8:57.
Yeah, I don't think we had time for one more. Did we do this one justice?
I mean, Jonathan has to be the judge of that, I suppose.
I don't know. I mean, it's just Martin answered the question. All groups tend to gravitate towards some principle, but they just wrap it in different justification. Aristotle's justification is purely empirical.
Yeah, I think what separates the difference here is whether it's essentially made up versus survives falsification, i.e., the empirical process.
Right. So I just take the empirical position is just there are laws of nature, and then within that the natural law. And the problem is it's not fully stated as the natural law of cooperation, right? So the laws of nature, right, the physical laws and the natural law, but the natural law is of the natural law of cooperation. That's it. All right. So are we done?
Mm-hmm.
Can you do your thing?
Well, you should do your outro.
Well, I mean, usually you say, all right, I'll do it this way.
This is Francis, Martin, and Curt for the Natural Law Institute. This is Friday, March 6th, 2026. Oh my God, I'm feeling so old. We answered 6 questions tonight, which is pretty good. Which is about average, right? That's about average.
About average. Maybe even a little bit above average.
All right. Thank you for listening. Go to the link in the comments. Submit your questions if you have any. We'll eventually get to them. I want to thank. I guess it's whoever it was that asked the really good questions today. I mean, these questions are excellent.
Martin for 3 and 4.
And just one from Jonathan is really good. Is there any others?
The other ones did not put their name on it.
They put their name on it. All right, so these are great questions. So I want to thank you very much. So, Francis, what do you want to add?
Ring bell, subscribe.
All right, thanks all for hope you got something out of it.
Take care, y'all.